Now, the first thing here is always the client themselves. So I usually put me. You can either work with a group from childhood, usually your home, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a school group or something like that, or current situation that you're involved in.
My anger feels quite current, but also I can see how it affected me growing up, and school is a really good example. We might be able to tie both in. So we'll go with school groups in the past and see if it links into now, if that's all right.
Absolutely. So
Yes.
who would you like to start with?
There was a Mrs. Hutchinson. We could put Mrs. H and another teacher. He was my geography teacher. He was a Mr. H, but they're not related.
Okay. Is there anyone else?
My grandma.
Yeah. You can stick with four, or you've got two more slots if you want to use them.
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe we'll stick with that and
But we
then
can always add them.
we can add them and see where we go.
Absolutely. Down here, you'll see the two sets of cards, which you'll be familiar with from using the physical cards. And we'll just work through them. And if they're relevant, we put them up underneath the labels. If they're not relevant, we just leave them be. All right. So we'll start with the volcano. I erupt suddenly and frighteningly without warning.
So that was Mrs. H.
Mrs. H. Okay. The sinkhole. I turn my anger inward into shame and self-blame.
Yep, I'd certainly have done that.
That was you. Yeah, I'll pop
Yeah,
you in there. The desert. I don't do emotions. There's no anger here.
that's not really relevant to the people on the screen.
The iceberg. I treat you with coldness and withdraw into silence.
That was my grandma.
The tornado. I throw things, break things, and yell loudly.
No,
The backbiter. I will make sure other people know what you're really like.
you could put that as Mr. H.
Okay. The stew pot. I go over and over what you've done. Can't let it go.
Sometimes that's me until I resolve the issue.
Yeah. The sniper. I take pot shots at you. Constant little digs.
I think maybe put that as me, and I tend to put the blame out there on other people close to me, and therefore might pick a fault with them because I've not taken responsibility for my own feelings. It's not constant, but it's certainly an element.
Thank you. The abuser. I use verbal and or physical violence.
Mr. H.
The pressure cooker. I let things build and build until I blow.
Mrs. H, maybe. Yeah, I'd say.
Outrage. I'm powerless, scared, and need someone to blame.
Maybe I ought to put that for me because it's worth looking at these things.
The walker. I'm out of here.
My grandma.
Sarah felt that the defeatist and whatever cards were not really relevant for these characters, but Mrs. H was definitely a toddler, and she herself could be a bit of a scorekeeper. The closed door. I'm not prepared to discuss this.
Grandma.
One strike and you're out.
I think I've worked through that. So.
Okay. Sarah didn't feel that the anaesthetizer card was relevant for this group of people. The flood was interesting in that she didn't find the words were quite right. It wasn't that she wanted people to back down, but she was genuinely frightened, and the tears came then. The avoider wasn't relevant for this group. The sponge. I soak up other people's stuff. I can't reach my own feelings.
Yeah, I think that's really worth discussing. I'll put that on my.
Yeah.
Wow, these are really helpful.
The snapper.
Yeah, put that on my file.
And the people pleaser. I hide my anger so you'll think I'm nice.
Yeah, you can put that on my file. I've got this very clear chapter to talk about at school. What I noticed I'm doing is thinking about that, but also thinking about today. It's hard to separate my anger from today with the past experience. I'm going to change modes so that you can see them as you would lay them out physically. We've got Grandma, who's an iceberg, a walker, a closed door. Do you want to say any more about that? Yeah, I mean, for example, there was one whole year when she didn't speak to my granddad. And she came to stay with us when I was about 7, which is when this teacher was around as well. God. So it was a difficult time. We're looking at you around about the age of 7. Yeah, I realised that we are. Which teacher would you like to talk about first? Well, it's Mrs. H. Mr. H was a little bit later. She would just tell me off, and I hadn't really genuinely didn't know what I'd done. And my mum took me to the doctor because I kept having tummy ache. And I think the doctor said, "What's this teacher doing to these children?" So I don't think I was isolated.
Wow.
But for example, she shouted, someone had done something wrong, and I looked round and she shouted, "Why are you looking round? It's you, child, stand up." And it was that fear of thinking, what have I done? I didn't know. So that was so scary.
I really feel for that 7-year-old self, and it's touching on current issues.
It certainly made me fearful of authority figures and people that were angry. Mr. H was a little bit older. I was a teenager, and again, I remember him just taking my essay. He literally pulled it apart in front of the class and said how badly I was going to do. And he used to get really cross. Actually, I did well and did the same as his favourite, who was a boy. When we got our results, he basically said, "I can't believe it. I didn't deserve to do that well." It leaves me with anger.
It makes me feel angry for you now that he could undermine you so much and be so horrid at such a vulnerable age. You're a teenager now. Is that right?
Yes, so those two memorable
Absolutely.
authority figures.
Would you like to just simply work through the list, or?
Pauline, these are so helpful. I've not seen anything like this before. It's wonderful. So the first one, the sinkhole.
Yep.
I definitely tend to think that it's my fault. The stupok, it's sort of like a tape. If I feel rejected or hurt, really badly hurt, it tends to go around in a little tape. I think that was especially at a time when you're younger and you can't say what you think or feel. The sniper, that one I'll put with the snapper. I was thinking what makes me angry at the moment, and I think it's a lack of hope for change is one of them, with disappointment and things like that.
I can see why you put those two together. I wonder if it's connected to outrage, the feeling of powerless, scared, and needing to hit something. Does that resonate with you, Sarah?
Yeah, so it's helpful to see that.
Sarah had already talked about being a scorekeeper and about the flood. She did acknowledge that she was a bit of a sponge when it came to other people's emotions, which she picked up easily, being very empathic and sensitive. And she had already talked about the snapper being like the sniper as well. And then finally, the people pleaser. I hide my anger so you'll think I'm nice.
I think I used to do that as a child, certainly.
You've described those feelings for yourself very powerfully, and I'm really not surprised considering what was going on. The whole dynamic of what you've been describing seems to be around in the here and now. So this can help us. For example, you could say, I need to be more assertive and pop that on that list, but that's not the only thing. I'm going to undo that. As we've got two spare labels, we could put what I need to do or things to work on. What does that feel like to you?
I think in a lot of things, you're always on a journey. You're on a journey with anger, dealing with it or not.
So if I put my journey there,
yeah.
Shall we see how we get on and see if this works? And if there's another label there, you could even say, no thanks, I'm not going to do that. But for example, the first one here is setting boundaries as to how others may treat me. What does that do for you when you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant thing to do. I think maybe we'll have my journey, and instead of no thanks, we'll have toolkits. Because I think the assertiveness is something that I can learn as well.
When you think about the current situations that are going on around for you, one option is just to walk away, I'm going to end the relationship, or actually, I'm in.
I'm definitely in.
Okay, and is that journey?
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah worked her way through the cards: calm, courage, forgiveness, displacement, identifying the hurt, finding my voice. And they went into my journey or the toolkit categories, some of them going into both. As we change the mode, which one would you like to start with, Sarah? My journey or the toolkit?
I like the toolkit idea. It gives me confidence. It's there. These are practical things that we can do. You can still have your stuff, but you can do this and it will help. The toolkit is to set boundaries as to how others may treat me. And you'll see it's gone yellow. That's because it's in another list, which of course it's in the journey one. I will not explode with anger, nor will I take it out on others. I will seek to be curious about and not overwhelmed by my feelings. I will look at both perspectives. I will stop taking the blame. I will speak the truth.
and I will remove myself if it gets heated. And obviously, if you were my client, this would be the area we would be working on. We would be looking at what those mean and what happens when you try and put them into practice, and very practical things.
Yeah.
While the whole purpose of therapy is the journey, just explore what is happening to you with this.
Yeah, I feel two things. One, if I start to do some of those things, they will complement each other and build a more confident person. Therefore, the anger will be dealt with better. Some things sparked a little bit of fear, like speaking the truth, because we've tried to do that recently with a couple and it's like they haven't heard us. But the others are like dominoes and complement one another really well. And I feel really encouraged by them. It was marvelous, if I'm honest with you, Pauline. I could see everything. I had the space and time to think about what you were asking me. Very practical. And actually, I think online is easier.
That's an interesting comment.
It felt like you could really move them around with ease. They could go in two places, very smooth.
I think the fact that they duplicate themselves, you have an infinite number of cards. If everybody in the family, for example, has the same attitude with their expressing their anger, you've got a limitless number of cards. Obviously, you need to know how many will fit on the screen, but it's just the confines of the screen that are limiting.
Yeah.
And it seemed to work okay, didn't it?
It did, and I didn't feel judged. I felt I had the space to say, this is how it applies to me, and this is what it looks like, this is what it looked like, this is what it looks like now.
And you can adapt it. We use the 2 blank labels. I've never done that before, so you've got my journey and my toolkit. I thought was an excellent idea. Well done, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Pauline.